Compost has long been treated as the gold standard of soil fertility. It's dark, crumbly, smells right, and looks finished. But when it comes to how long roots are actually fed, compost is often misunderstood. Fermented inputs behave very differently in soil. And once you understand why, it becomes clear why they can support root systems for far longer than fully finished compost ever does. Finished compost is stable by design. That stability is what makes it safe to apply around plants. Most of the easily available sugars, proteins, and simple compounds have already been consumed during the composting process. What remains is humus and mineral-bound nutrients that release slowly over time. This is excellent for building structure and improving water retention, but it means compost does very little to actively stimulate microbial activity once applied. Roots benefit from compost indirectly, not dynamically. The soil food web stays calm, steady, and slow. Fermented inputs arrive in soil at a very different stage. During hot composting, heat is generated by aerobic microbes consuming carbon and nitrogen rapidly. A significant portion of that energy is lost as heat and gas. Fermentation does not burn energy the same way. It locks much of it into organic acids, microbial biomass, and partially digested plant material. This matters because roots don't feed on nutrients alone, they feed on microbial activity. Fermented inputs introduce both food and active organisms at the same time. That creates a living nutrient exchange that continues long after application. Plant roots are not passive straws. They actively communicate with microbes using sugars, amino acids, and enzymes. When fermented material enters soil, microbes respond immediately. They multiply, move, and begin processing the input. As microbial populations grow, they release nutrients in pulses rather than all at once. This approach matches root uptake patterns far better than, say, compost, which releases nutrients at a slow, uniform rate, regardless of plant demand. This is why fermented inputs often produce stronger root branching and deeper root penetration. You see, the roots follow biological activity downward. One of the most overlooked benefits of fermentation is acid production. Lactic acid, acetic acid, and other weak organic acids are formed during fermentation. When diluted and introduced into soil, these acids do not harm roots. Instead, they temporarily lower pH at the micro scale. That brief acidity, frees calcium, phosphorus, potassium, and trace minerals that are bound to soil particles. As microbes metabolize the acids, the pH returns to normal, but the unlocked nutrients, well, they remain available. Compost just doesn't have this effect because most acids have already been neutralized during curing. Because fermented inputs are biologically active, nutrients are quickly immobilized into microbial bodies. This, in turn, prevents leaching, especially nitrogen loss. When plants need nutrients, they actually stimulate microbial grazing through root exudates, releasing nutrients right at the root surface. Compost nutrients, by contrast, are more exposed. Rain, irrigation, and soil disturbance can move soluble fractions away from root zones before plants access them. This microbial buffering is one of the main reasons fermented inputs feed longer despite using smaller quantities. Compost finishes above ground. Fermented inputs finish in soil. That distinction matters. As fermented material continues to break down underground, it becomes part of the soil's living system. Fungi colonize it, bacteria process it, protozoa graze, and worms redistribute it. Each step releases nutrients slowly over weeks or months. Roots grow alongside this process. They don't receive a single dose, they receive a sequence of releases tied to biological activity and root demand. A small amount of fermented plant material buried 8 inches deep can feed a bed longer than a thick compost top dress. For example, 1 gallon of fermented plant slurry diluted 10-to-1 with water and applied to soil every 3 weeks often outperforms heavy compost additions in vegetable beds. So, the key here is really dilution and placement. Fermented inputs should be applied to the soil, not the foliage, and given time to infiltrate properly. Over-application can actually overwhelm soil biology, but modest, repeated doses can extend feeding well beyond the window that compost alone provides. Now, this isn't an argument against compost. Compost builds soil, plain and simple. Fermentation, on the other hand, feeds soil life. The most resilient gardens, well, they use both. Compost offers structure and long-term carbon storage, while fermented inputs provide energy, microbial stimulation, and extended root feeding. When gardeners rely on compost alone, the soil becomes stable but, a bit sluggish. But when fermented inputs are added thoughtfully, the soil really wakes up. Roots tend to senesce when microbial activity drops. Fermented inputs help maintain that microbial momentum. That, in turn, keeps nutrient cycling active deeper into the season and actually even into cooler soil temperatures. This is why, fermented inputs are especially valuable in early spring and late fall, when compost activity tends to slow down. Modern soils are often, biologically depleted. Compost alone just can't rebuild that quickly. Fermented inputs, however, accelerate recovery without stripping nutrients or, creating dependency. They feed roots for longer because, essentially, they feed the entire system that roots depend on. Once you understand this difference, compost stops being the finish line and instead becomes the foundation. Fermentation then becomes the engine that keeps roots fed long after compost has done its quiet work.